Yeah, definitely. Okay. So wait until the on air.
Good afternoon and welcome to this public meeting of the Youth Select Committee. I'm Alex Cowley. I chair this committee. The Youth Select Committee was established in autumn of 2023 to give young people in the Isle of Man the opportunity to scrutinise government policy and run inquiries on topics of interest to them. After talking to our peers, we decided to examine support available for young people to find suitable and affordable place to call home in the Isle of Man. Today we will hear from a range of witnesses, all of whom responded to our call for evidence earlier this year. First, we'll be hearing from an individual and a charity with direct experience of the challenges facing young people who are looking for suitable housing in the island. Then we will hear from organisations who have proposals for how to address the issues behind the housing crisis. Please ensure that any mobile phones are turned off or on silent so that we do not have any interruptions. For the purposes of Hansard, I will be ensuring that we do not have two people speaking at once. With me today are the other members of the committee, who I will ask to introduce themselves now.
Hello, I'm Aidan Clark.
Hello, I'm Rina Salmon.
And I'm David Cowan.
Thank you for attending today. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, so my name's Massimo Formby. I'm a returning student here. I'm 23 years old and I currently live in a HMO with 4 peers.
Okay, brilliant. So it's great to have you here today, Massimo. How did you kind of arrive at these living arrangements? How did they come about?
So essentially after university, being a returning student, I was at home after finishing my master's for 4 months. And then essentially, after living out for 4 years at university, obviously I still want to retain that experience over here. And, if I was staying here, then I'd like to, move out with my peers and create the life that anybody would expect to have in the UK, in terms of not having to stay at home, but, in terms of being active with my friends and, being able to stay here and have a place, obviously, that we can all live together.
Okay, and so in terms of kind of moving away from your parents, like you say, living alone, did you kind of feel forced into moving in with friends, or did you feel you had other options?
Well, that's an interesting one actually, because after university I was very much hoping to see if I could afford a place by myself actually, but the first kind of road to understanding why that's not possible is simply the cost and the availability. So yeah, I suppose it was kind of a systemic based decision as to why we moved into a HMO as opposed to renting by myself.
Okay, thank you very much. And what's been your experience of renting on the Isle of Man? How have you found it?
Awful.
Awful. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so, there's 2 parts in this story. One is the actual understanding how we can get into a house in the first place. And the other part is, going about the various ways in which we can resolve the issues found in part A. So part A, which was actually getting into the property, was incredibly difficult as well. We were told that we had to pay double deposit also because we were taken one look at and said, oh, well, you guys are going to throw parties. We haven't thrown, a single, all we've been doing is working, but, straight away within 2 seconds, they looked at us and went, you have to pay double deposit. So that was also a dampener straight away. The other aspect to it is there's just no housing as well. We tried for about 2 months we were looking at, and we had to pick the first one that we could get, which essentially led to the issues, because obviously, that's why clearly there was that housing on offer, and, that was the only option that we could take, so we took it. So the second part of the story is, resolving the issues found in part A. As soon as we moved into the property, we were very, very aware there was severe structural issues. And, we abided by all the relevant legislation and guidance bestowed upon us by, various government Isle of Man sites. And, got in contact with the relevant people to understand the processes behind, because firstly, we were made aware that in the UK, if there is an issue, very likely, the tenants will withhold rent and it gets sorted that way. However, over here, we were made very aware that if we did that within the first few months, then we'd be kicked out straight away. So moving back to the kind of the part 2, which is sorting everything out, one thing I'd like to highlight straight away is, we chased an environmental health report, and, we went to environmental health, obviously an officer came around, then we went to the Office of Fair Trading, then we had to go down to Douglas Borough Council to get the report after being asked, we asked for it 5 times and we didn't get it, only to be told that we couldn't be given it due to GDPR. So, that was obviously a kicker. So unfortunately, we were well aware of the structural issues right from day one. We went round, we took pictures of everything, which were date and timestamps to, maintain evidence. We got in contact straight away under the 14-day period where, you are advised to contact and make aware of the issues, the agents. We did everything over the course of a few months. We have, several timelines of, documented work that are going to be taking place. But essentially, the whole process has very much favoured the landlord. Every single action that we could take to rectify the issue have less and less power, and essentially we had to just pay and move out and get out, and we've had to terminate our contract because of the issues which have been found. The landlord clearly doesn't want to pay for it, and he's crafted a situation in which it's incentivized for us to leave or we get taken to court, essentially.
Okay. And just one last question from me then. As a tenant, what sort of reform would you like to see in this area? What would you say the main 3 things that you think need to be reformed are?
Well, number one, clearly, one of the preconditions for entering into a house often that I've heard from multiple different people is, no kids, no pets, no smoking. That limits the population down to about 10% realistically. So that was the first issue which has been found. Obviously if people with children are wanting to move out and the majority of the shortage in housing, says, well, there's no children, well, straight away that's an issue. So first of all, there needs to be greater understanding of the characteristics of the people that are actually wanting to be tenants as opposed to homeowners. And secondly, there needs to be a standards body, because the house in which was signed off to us as okay was clearly not okay. And anybody that we've gone round and spoken to and shown the issues has also clearly communicated that, which is why it was interesting that the environmental health report had come back and said that the house was habitable, although we could clearly see the damp readings were 999 on every room. And we know that because we went around with the officer who did so. So for that to be communicated to us then, and then to find out 5 months later that the house was deemed habitable, what cards do we have? Essentially we were left with no other option but to take the option that we had been backed into. So the number one issue is that we tried every single route. We tried, Douglas Borough Council, we went down to them, we tried environmental health over many months as well. This was not a rushed process. This has occurred over 9 months, and every single route in which has just essentially done nothing to aid our situation. So all the existing routes which could have been taken did not help.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, over to you.
Yeah. So in your experience, building on from what you've said, what would you say are the biggest challenges, or the single biggest challenge that faces young people in housing?
Availability of houses, protections for tenants, and thirdly, I'd have to say the information access to understanding how we could go about rectifying issues that we found.
Issues, okay. Thank you. I think that's basically covered everything I need. Thank you.
Do you hope to buy a house one day? And if you do, please give reasons why or why not you wouldn't.
Well, that's a wider economic issue. If you look at homeowner rates in Switzerland, they have a very, very different rate. I suppose it's a cultural issue. Certainly I do want to be a homeowner at some point, but, given the economic circumstances in which we find ourselves, I think renting is probably most appropriate for the demographic for a considerable amount of years. So there's no straight answer to that, unfortunately. At some point, yes, but in the short term, I'm not too sure.
Okay, thank you.
So would you say you don't think that it's feasible for you to buy a house?
It's certainly a uncertain situation.
I'd just like to ask, if you had the opportunity, would you prefer to live in social housing, if that was available to you, or would you prefer the private market?
Private market.
Private market. Could I ask you why?
Yeah, well, essentially, I think I attended the 2-day government conference, and one of the issues there very, very clearly is the attraction and retention of young people. and heavily within that is the ability to live with peers. So I think the private tenancy option is much more suitable to our particular demographic, as opposed to the social housing, which is often, if I may be incorrect, determined by people's context much more. Rather, the private route is much more a choice, perhaps. So I think young people want to have that choice.
I'd just like to ask, do you feel the housing demographic, especially for young people, is being misrepresented?
In terms of, do you think that the government, or do you think the demographics put out to be that the young people only want to go into renting and they're not looking to buy? I think, obviously we have a much higher GDP per capita than, the average place. So I suppose there's going to be a relatively higher proportion of the younger population that perhaps is able to. But I think certainly one of the interesting things is, it's not something that is much openly discussed, in terms of looking around my peer group. We were one of the first to move out. It's not really a normalized thing. However, I think increasingly you are going to see people who want to retain on the island, and also given cost of living pressures, who are going to increase that representation of people who want private tenancy.
Earlier on you said that you weren't given any information or had the relevant education to make informed decisions on housing, like you didn't really know anything about how the housing over here works. So would I be right in saying that you feel as if you've had a lack of education on the housing system from over here? So when you left uni and you wanted to go and try and find a house, look in the rental market, you weren't too sure as to how it worked?
Yes, I suppose. In terms of the localized regulation differences, that certainly wasn't, obviously we applied what I understood in my 4 years through, private tenancy renting at university, and went about trying to apply some of that knowledge here and understood that it was different. So I suppose, yes, there was a lack of quote unquote education in that sense, yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, would you say that the housing situation has had an impact on your mental health?
It's certainly been extremely frustrating. The way in which the landlord has been able to speak to us has certainly added to an uncertain outlook for relevant things such as financing and understanding, okay, well, how can I budget myself? Are we going to be taken to court? And speaking to the peers within the house, it certainly was of impact. It's not one that I could classify, but I certainly would say that yes, there was an impact on mental health across my peers within the house due to the situation.
And have you ever considered moving away off island because of the housing situation?
Not because of the housing situation. I think given my career and what I want to do, it's very different. However, I suppose it's important to mention one of the peers in which I am living with is a friend from UK. He lives in Manchester and he moved over here, but he is now going back to the UK due to the issues found within the house specifically. And that has led to him to now, remove himself from the island and go back, which is obviously a loss of money to the economy, and I would like to understand exactly how much has left the economy due to the housing issues as well.
So I'm right in thinking that if you were wanting to move off island, the housing situation wouldn't have any impact in your decision?
No. Due to my career, I'd like to add to that. I think with other people, it must play a much, much bigger role. However, for me personally, no.
So you mentioned that the property you were living in was very damp. Did it have any impact on your physical health at all, or of your co-renters?
I mean, obviously we didn't, go to the doctors or anything like that, but, I can say, within a month of us being in the property, all of us were ill. As it gets cold, it gets very cold. I sleep right next to, black mold. So I'm sure that is probably impacting my health in ways in which I can't measure. I suppose the damp readings as well, that certainly adds to respiratory problems as well. And, certainly we have felt a impact on our health, but that has not been quantified within any official reports. So that's unfortunate.
Okay, so as you may be aware, in 2021, I believe it was, Tynwald passed the Landlord Registration Act, but of course we're still waiting on the Department of Infrastructure to actually implement the secondary legislation to properly regulate the market. Is there anything you'd like to see included in these regulations? Anything in particular? Or just kind of to emphasise all of your previous points about property standards and
I think firstly,
interaction with landlords?
The way in which we tried to go about resolving the issues was, we contacted Office of Fair Trading, we contacted Environmental Health, we had asked the Citizens Advice Bureau, we tried to go down and do a pro bono with, reputable law firms here. We also spoke to the council. That's 5 people.
Yeah.
So I think straight away that process needs to be streamlined. There is.
I think there needs to be a singular body responsible for renters' rights.
A standards board.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Which is also equipped to handle, incoming as well as outgoing, because what I mean by that is, it's not just one function. The function needs to, be able to take and give environmental health reports and also be able to provide advice as well. The issue is all of these ways in which we can go about rectifying the situation are disaggregated. So it needs to be one singular board which has broad responsibilities to suit everything which could come under that board's responsibilities.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Would you say that the current system and legislation has failed you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just before, I was asking you whether you think that the housing situation's impacted your mental health. Would you say that it's impacted your physical health?
Not that I can quantify in an official report. However, in informal conversations with my peers, we have all said we feel like it was.
Well, thanks again for attending.
worries.
We will now suspend the sitting and we will resume at 3 o'clock.